Hey everybody, John King with Summit Funding. Thank you for joining me for my Financial Friday live stream. Live stream. If it wasn't a live stream, what would it be? How much wood could a woodchuck chuck? A woodchuck could chuck cheese. Could chuck wood. See, woodchucks don't even chuck cheese; they chuck wood. Anyway, um, enough about me and my banter. Thank you for joining me. Looking forward to a great presentation today on a challenging topic. And it is, I'm not afraid to bring up challenging topics, but it's things that people need to be aware of. And so as we think about, financial lessons, this isn't obviously a lesson you should have learned in school. I do have a series of financial lessons you should have learned in school, but divorce is not one of them. But it is the truth about reality in life that people get divorced. And life has to go on. And so the question becomes, how do I, as a loan officer, help to educate those people who are going through challenges with divorce and figuring out, how do I handle home financing? What do? I'm renting now and I want to buy, I own now and I want to keep the home that I'm living in right now and buy out my ex-spouse, or we own a house and we want to sell it and split the money and buy something else. And a lot of it is pretty straightforward and a lot of it isn't. There's a lot of nuance. So if you are going through a divorce, if you've recently been divorced, or if you're going to be going through a divorce, I really want to focus on the things that you need to know. And I'm also going to be speaking to realtors and industry partners, because it's critical that you're able to guide people through these circumstances and these challenges when they're dealing with divorce, and how you would best advise your clients if you're a realtor or an industry partner. So let's go ahead and dive in. If you have questions and you're watching live, please post the questions into whatever social media platform you're watching on, and I'll be able to get I'll get notified here and I'll be able to bring your comment up. If you're watching recorded, post your questions and I'll get back to them. I'll get notification and I'll get back to you. So let's start with the first question that everybody always asks me. John, do I have to wait until the divorce is final before I do something? Well, the answer is maybe and maybe not. There's a lot of moving parts to this, and a lot of what I'm going to talk about during this recording has to do with, under certain circumstances, you can do it before you're divorced. Under certain circumstances, you have to wait until after you're divorced. And it's a moving target. So everybody's situation is going to be different, but I want to give you the best advice I possibly can today to help guide you and give you a realistic expectation of what's going to happen. So the first thing is, California is a community property state. Because California is a community property state, if you are buying a home and you're married and you're not including your spouse on the home loan or the ownership of the home, then they have to sign a document called an interspousal grant deed. The reason why they have to do that is because your spouse, now you might be going through a divorce, but until you're legally divorced, your spouse is entitled to ownership of everything that you own. So you and your spouse, community property says all of your assets belong to each other and all of your debts belong to each other. And that's critical as we talk through this conversation, that you understand that. So if you are trying to buy a home in California and you are still legally married, then your spouse has to sign an interspousal grant deed that is a specific document about this specific property that you are buying. That means that your spouse has to be in good terms communicating with you, and they can't sign the documents in advance of you finding a home. They can't just sign off a little waiver that says, hey, my spouse agreed that if I buy a house, they're going to have no rights to it. They have to grant their automatic or implied ownership of the property back to you at the time that the transaction is closing. That doesn't have to sign at the same time you sign at the end. We can have them sign earlier in the escrow. But here's the problem that I find comes up, that your soon-to-be ex says, yeah, I'll sign it for you. And then we get down to the end and they realize they can use that as leverage against you. They can say, hey, I'm not going to sign that unless you agree to pay me whatever, or give me that car, or give me something in the negotiation of the marital separation agreement. Everything is negotiable. And if you need their help in order to sign off, get them to sign off on the home, they can hold you hostage. So be aware of that fact and decide, hey, is this an amicable divorce or not? Are we going to have an issue down the road when we're not yet legally divorced and I try and close escrow, and I need to get your signature on this. So that's critical when you think about, do I have to wait until the divorce is final? A lot of other things come into play, but the most critical thing that comes into play is the fact that you are still legally married, and California is a community property state. Now that brings up the question of legal separation. So legal separation, I hear it a little bit different answers. I always check with my legal department, and I check with my title company to confirm. First of all, most people say, hey, John, I'm legally separated. I'm sorry, they don't use the word legally. Most people, when they call me up and say, hey, John, I'm going through a divorce and I want to talk about home financing. And so I'll ask them, okay, so then your marital status is married. No, we're separated. Separated is a legal term. Separated does not mean physically living apart. Separated doesn't mean managing our money separately. Separated means you have a legal court-approved document that says I am legally separated from this person. During a legal separation, the court is assigning debt and saying, hey, you're legally separated. This person's responsible for this debt, and this person's responsible for this debt. And so a legal separation is pretty similar to a divorce decree in that I can ignore a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today, and it creates close to a divorced situation, but very, very few people are actually legally separated. There's no point. If you're going to get a divorce, most people get a divorce. There's no point in going through the entire process of hiring attorneys and going to court to get a legal separation. So be real clear on the difference between a legal separation and being separated, because on the loan application, one of the checkboxes says marital status and an option is separated. That means legally separated, not physically separated. All right. So another question I get often is, hey, John, I want to buy out my ex and keep the current home. That is absolutely an option, but there's a lot of components coming into this. So the first thing is you've got to qualify by yourself, because clearly your ex is no longer going to be part of that transaction. The second thing is you've got to figure out, well, how much are you paying them to buy them out? Clearly, in most cases, you're going to want to pay the least possible. They're going to want to pay the most possible. Here's the formula that I use that I found a lot of attorneys think the same way, which is if you are buying out your spouse, pretend you are selling the house today and figure out how much proceeds that person would get. That's what you pay them. So I'm going to use a simple example. Let's say you sell a house for $500,000 that you owe $300,000 on. So in general, you'd say, okay, well, then there's $200,000 of equity. 100 belongs to me and 100 belongs to my ex. So if I just pay my ex out $100,000, then that's an appropriate amount of a buyout. You're actually overpaying them. Because if you sold the home today, you wouldn't get $500,000 because you have realtor commissions that you're going to pay. So it's anywhere, let's just call it 5% as a ballpark figure, which means you're spending $25,000 to sell the home. Now, if you took that $25,000 off of the $500, if you guys are selling the home today, you would actually net $475,000, pay off your mortgage of $300,000. That leaves you $175,000 to split, or $87,500 each. That is actually the right number in my opinion, but everything is negotiable. Even when you say this is the right calculation, if your soon-to-be ex doesn't agree, it can be negotiated. They can stand firm and say, I refuse to sell you the home if you don't agree. So you've got to be really clear about your expectations and where you're willing to negotiate. If they say, hey, I want $100,000 because that's half of the equity and they're not willing to negotiate on covering their portion of the cost to sell the home, you might be stuck. Here's the other thing that I get when people talk about that buyout is they say, John, it's not fair as the person being bought out to have to pay the commission because the house isn't being sold. But the truth is the house is being sold to you. And if you were the one that kept the house, you would have to pay commission on the full sale later on. If 6 months later you sold the house for $500,000, you're still paying the $25,000 in commissions. So it is appropriate to do that. Here's something else that concerns me when people go down this road. And that is they put a provision in the divorce decree that says, I want to buy out the home and I agree to put the property into my name within a certain amount of time after the divorce is finalized. And they do that without talking to me first. You actually negotiated for something that you might not be able to accomplish. And some of those agreements say if you don't buy out your spouse by 1 year after the divorce is finalized, then you're selling the house and your spouse splits it with you 50-50. Well, that's exactly what you didn't want to have happen. If you would have known at the time you negotiated that you couldn't qualify and that there was no way you were going to qualify, you could have negotiated for something else. The key is talk to a lender, talk to me early. If you own a home and you are thinking about getting a divorce, you need to talk to me at the same time as you're talking to your divorce attorney. If you are going through a divorce and you're negotiating and you want to buy out your spouse, you need to talk to me during the negotiations, even if you don't think it's going to happen until later. It is critical that while you're negotiating, you're talking to me. We're going to talk in the next few minutes about different things like income and assets and marital separation agreements. Those things are critical that you're talking to me while you're negotiating them, even if you don't think you're ready anytime soon to actually complete the purchase or to buy them out or do what you're going to do. You need to talk to me about how to structure your marital separation agreement. That is critical as we think about the process of going through a divorce and wanting to be a homeowner on the other side of this process. All right. So let's talk about the three things that matter in a mortgage and how they apply to a divorce. So the three things that matter to a mortgage are cash, credits, and income. And I'm going to break those down and really dive deep into some areas that are unique to a divorce situation in each of those three categories. So let's start with cash concerns when divorcing. So first of all, a lot of people ask me, John, can I get down payment assistance because I'm going through a divorce and we own a house right now that we're selling and I'm not going to get any money out of it. Now, the good news is here we are in September of 2022. And if you bought the house anytime prior to the last couple of years, really anytime prior to this year, you've got a good amount of equity in that property. But maybe you bought a house 3 months ago and now you have to turn around and sell it. And you didn't know 3 months ago when you bought the house that you were going to be going through a divorce or you wouldn't have bought. But neither one of you can afford the home. Neither one of you wants to keep the home. And so you're deciding, you know what? I want to go buy something else. But the down payment money that we had, first of all, we're losing a lot of it because we got to pay commissions to sell the house again. And secondly, we're splitting it in half. So I have nowhere near the down payment I had before. So the answer is yes, you can get down payment assistance even if you've owned a home. You can't own a home at the same time. You can't currently own a home. Let me rephrase that. You cannot own a home at the moment that you buy a new home using down payment assistance, but you can have recently sold a home. You could sell the home concurrently with buying the new home. Very few down payment assistance programs require you to be a first-time home buyer. There are some, but very few. So if you're going through a divorce, if you've lost all of your assets because you're paying attorney's fees, you're doing everything you can to pay off the debt that got run up due to the divorce, there's a lot of ugly things that happen in a divorce. And if you're in that situation and you're saying, John, I can't think about home ownership because I don't have the cash to come up with a down payment anymore. Yes, you can qualify for down payment assistance. And I think that's something that most people just dismiss and say, I'm not a first-time home buyer, so I can't do down payment assistance. Yes, you can. Cash is burned quickly in a divorce. And it's sad, but it's the truth. And whether, again, it's the attorney's fees, whether it's just expenses that you've got, having to now pay for 2 households instead of 1, alimony and child support, all of that stuff, cash disappears quickly in a divorce. So if that's your biggest concern is saying, John, I don't know how I'm going to maintain being a homeowner because I've lost the cash position that I had, down payment assistance is a good option. Continuing the conversation about cash, by the way, we've got more people that have joined. We've got about a dozen people watching right now on different social media platforms. If you have questions about anything that I'm talking about, or if you have something you want to make sure I cover, please post it into comments. So just put a comment into whatever platform that you're in. If you're watching recorded, comment and I'll go back and catch it afterwards. If you're watching live, I'll address it as we go. Here's a big one about marital separation agreements and negotiating with your soon-to-be ex. A lot of people will as part of the process, negotiate and say, hey, instead of alimony, I want your $300,000 401k, or I want, $150,000 cash payout because that'll help me buy a home better than alimony will. Well, that's not really true. We'll talk in a few minutes about income and how alimony and child support play into that if you're the person earning it or if you're the person paying it, and we'll discuss all of those pieces. But a lump sum of cash cannot be used as income to afford your mortgage. Back in 2011, the Dodd-Frank financial reform bill was passed, and it had a provision that is called the ability to repay rule. And it says the person who's borrowing the money, no matter how much they have in savings, no matter how big their down payment is, I can't give you a loan unless you have monthly income coming in equal to or sufficient enough to have the ability to repay this loan. Otherwise, the financial reform bill says I'm being predatory and setting you up for failure because clearly you don't have the income necessary to afford the payment. Now, I don't know if that's really true. If you got $1 million in the bank and you're buying a $500,000 home, you got the money to pay for it. You can pay for it every month just by pulling money out of there. But that's not how the financial reform bill was written. Now, there's some ways I can use that lump sum and call it income, and I've got lots of tools to be able to do that. So if that is your situation and you've got a huge sum of money, great. But this is why it's critical that I'm included as you're talking about the marital separation agreement negotiations, because I can help you figure out, hey, what should we do? Which direction should we go when we're thinking about this negotiation? Some divorces are amicable, and you're looking for a win-win. Some are not, and you're looking for just win. But the point is, if you think the definition of win is different than what I think the definition of what you need is, you're going to win, and then you're going to lose because you're not going to be able to accomplish your goal of homeownership. So in general, negotiating a lump sum payment doesn't help you in qualifying for a loan. Yes, it helps you with the down payment. Yes, you have a lower monthly payment, all of that stuff. But I would rather see you have a small down payment. I will more easily qualify you with a small down payment and regular monthly income through alimony and or child support and your job, as opposed to you having a huge amount of down payment. Obviously, if the down payment's enough to pay cash for the house, cool, you don't need me. You can hang up now, stop watching this video. I don't want you here. Just kidding. But the point is, if you are negotiating for a lump sum, you have the option to negotiate for monthly income. Often, monthly income is better for you when you're looking at buying a home. Let's dive into credit concerns when divorcing. This is a big piece. Again, we're talking about the three pieces that go into a mortgage: cash, credit, and income. We've just covered cash. Credit concerns when divorcing. First and foremost, maintain your credit score. You're distracted. Divorce, death, disability, there's drugs, the big D's that get you completely sidetracked. You lose the ability to function as you normally would function. And those challenges put you in a position that you will forget to make your monthly payments. You will charge too much on your credit cards because you've got attorney's fees, and you're not working as much because you're stressed out, and you're taking some personal leave, and your income has dropped, and you're getting behind on your credit cards, or you're letting your credit card bills pile up. All of those things are going to harm your goal of becoming a homeowner on the other side of the divorce. So it's critical that you figure out a way to maintain your good credit. Now, there's some things that are within your control and some things that aren't within your control. And we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. So first of all, we will talk about, well, I'll just go in order here. I want to talk about payments on debts that are assigned to your ex. Once the marital separation agreement is filed and the divorce is finalized, or if you have a court-signed legal separation agreement, then I don't have to count the payments on the debts that were assigned to your spouse, your ex-spouse. But let's be clear here. The problem is a couple of things. You have to be super, super clear on how it is written in the marital separation agreement. Because if you say, one party gets the house on Main Street and the other party gets the house on First Street, you didn't say anything about who's responsible for the debt. Just because, and I've seen attorneys write this very, very poorly, just because you say they got the house doesn't mean they're responsible for the debt. You have to clearly state and responsible for all associated debts. You have to clearly divide these debts and saying, hey, these payments belong to this party, these payments belong to this party. You need to outline each individual credit card. It's not even enough sometimes to say all credit cards are belonging to this party, or half the credit cards belong to this party. That's the worst that I see. Half the credit cards they're splitting the credit cards 50-50. 50-50 what? Like, take all the accounts and I write a check for half of the payment, you write a check for the other half? Or do we split the accounts down the middle and which accounts go to one party and the other? You need to outline account by account. And you need to put account numbers in the marital separation agreement, because I've seen so many agreements that say the Chase card goes to this party, the Wells Fargo card goes to this party, the worst yet, the Best Buy card goes to this party. Guess what? Best Buy is not a bank. On your credit card, half the time it doesn't say Best Buy. It says Chase or Citi or whoever is the bank behind Best Buy. Put account numbers, put dollar amounts. As of today, the Best Buy account number, blank, 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 that has a current balance of blank is now fully responsible by this party. Being clear on this is critical. But here's the good news. When it's clear and when it's been signed off by the judge, I can ignore all of those payments. Now, what most people misunderstand is they're like, John, why are they still on my credit reports? The fact is they're on your credit report because you were originally obligated to pay, and they will continue to stay on your credit report, because just because the court says you're not obligated to make monthly payments, the bank is not automatically going to remove your name off of the account. Okay. That makes a really big deal when we're talking about credit scores that were assigned to your ex. Okay. Because the credit impact to late payments. So I'm gonna make sure I wrote this correctly. Impact to credit score does count for debts assigned to X. Yes, I said that correctly. So I want to explain what this means. A moment ago, I said, as long as you do it properly on the divorce decree and the marital separation agreement, you don't have to worry about counting the monthly payments that your ex is responsible for. That is a true statement, but it's still showing up on your credit report. So if your ex makes a late payment on a credit card, or a late payment on a car, or a late payment on a mortgage, it will lower your credit score, and I can't undo that. It's part of the credit score. Your ex could tank your ability to qualify for a mortgage simply by stopping paying their bills, because that will impact your credit history. So if you want to make sure that doesn't happen, then maybe part of the divorce decree is you say one X party is responsible for the Best Buy credit card and must open a new account in their name within 30 days of today and transfer the balance to that account. Now you've put in writing they must. Now, if they don't do it, you got to take them back to court. But you at least put in writing, you must move this account. You must open a new credit card and pay off the joint accounts, and we need to close the joint accounts. That will stop your ex's bad credit history from impacting you. That is a major problem that people misunderstand, is those accounts, even though the payment is no longer your responsibility, the late payment is still hindering or hurting you. Now, here's the good news about this, which is if there's specific things that are a problem, such as mortgage late payments are a problem separate from credit score. I'll give you an example. I had a client last week who had good credit, a 700 credit score, but a year and a half ago had one late payment on a mortgage. It was a second mortgage, but it was one late payment on a second mortgage. And when you're pulling cash out, you can't have any late payments in the last 2 years. So this person could not qualify, not because their credit score, but because the late payment is built into the credit score. But they couldn't qualify because of the fact that the late payment happened, and it's on their credit report. Now, if that was a divorce situation, let's pretend that person had gotten divorced prior to that late payment date, and that debt for that second mortgage was assigned to their ex. Yes, the late payment is still going to impact their credit score, but I can ignore the actual late payment on the credit report. In other words, The fact that the rules say you can't have a late payment in 2 years if you're pulling cash out on a refinance, we can ignore that, and it's okay because that late payment we can see wasn't your fault, even though it still shows up in your credit report. The same holds true for foreclosures and short sales. So if your ex has a foreclosure on a home that happened after the divorce and after it was legally assigned to them, you are not penalized by that foreclosure. So the foreclosure rules say you can't buy a home for 4 years or 5 years or 7 years after a foreclosure. But I can ignore those rules. I can ignore those rules because I see the marital separation agreement. I see the legal signed court-ordered divorce decree, and I can see that all of that happened before the house went into foreclosure. So the foreclosure itself is not your responsibility, but all the late payments on that account still will hurt your credit score. So I can never arbitrarily increase the credit score to ignore the late history of anything, but I can ignore late mortgage payments that make a penalty waiting period, and I can ignore a short sale or a foreclosure that has a penalty waiting period. So I hope that helps, and that makes a little bit of sense there. So here's the other thing about debts. If you're doing an FHA or a VA loan in a community property state like California, then those debts count towards the debts of your spouse count as your debts. Okay. What I mean by that, and let me say it more clearly, is that California being a community property state, what you own, they own. What you owe, they owe, and vice versa. So if you are still married and you want to buy a home before the divorce is finalized, and you are using FHA or VA, I must pull your spouse's credit reports. Now, mind you, their name is not going to be on your loan. Their name is not going to be on your home, but all of their debts, I have to count against you. I don't have to count their credit history. I don't care about their credit score or anything else because they're not a borrower. But I do care about their monthly payments. What are they obligated to pay? Because you are still legally obligated to pay those until the divorce decree is finalized. And so be aware that's a huge critical issue when you're looking at trying to do a loan before the divorce is finalized. So in that case, what you're looking at is a conventional loan, usually being the best option if you're trying to buy prior to the divorce being finalized, because with a conventional loan, I don't need to count your ex or soon to be ex's debts. But remember, as I said at the beginning of the program, hey, it's a program, at the show, beginning of the show, at the top of the show, how many times can I say that? That I said, if you're still married, no matter what, your soon-to-be ex has to sign an interspousal grant deed, and they have to sign that once you're in contract. So going conventional does not negate your requirement to have them sign the interspousal grant deed, but at least I don't have to count their debt against you. I'm going to go back and explain really quick. I had a situation earlier this year with a client that had a mortgage late, and it was his ex-wife who had the late payment on the mortgage. And he said, John, it wasn't my fault. That was assigned to my wife in the divorce. Well, the late payment was in March of 2021. And he was trying to buy, actually it was in April of 2021. And he was trying to buy in February of 2022. And he says, well, no, but that's been assigned to my wife. That's part of the divorce. It's her responsibility. And he said, and on top of that, I wasn't even living there. Well, whether he was living there or not doesn't matter. What does matter is when was the divorce finalized compared with when the late payment happened. The divorce was finalized in May. He was responsible for that debt still until the divorce was finalized. Even if he moved out, even if they had a gentleman's agreement, I don't know if there are gentleman's agreements in divorces, but even if they had an agreement that the spouse was going to pay for it, she didn't. And so she had a late payment that hurt him, and it stopped him from being able to qualify for a mortgage. And there's nothing we could do about it because legally he was responsible for that payment. All right. So now let's go back and let's go forward and let's talk about paying alimony and child support. So in a few minutes, I'm going to talk about receiving alimony and child support. Right now, I'm going to tell you about paying alimony and child support. First and foremost, if you are obligated to pay, first of all, if you're doing a divorce and you're not yet finalized, we want to know who's paying who what's. Now you might say, John, I won't have to pay anything right now. So I want to close this loan right away because I know in 3 months when the divorce is finalized, I've got to pay $2,000 a month in alimony and child support. We know that you're going through a divorce. That's been disclosed. Therefore, we have to ask, what are your obligations going to be? And we're going to require a letter signed by you and your soon-to-be ex saying, this is what we are agreeing to, and I have to count it. Now, if they say, hey, we're agreeing that there's going to be no alimony and child support paid, if you both sign it, I'm okay with that. It's rare that if that wasn't the case that your ex is going to sign that, or your soon-to-be ex, because you could use it against them in court by saying, wait, she signed this form saying she's waiving her rights to alimony and child support, or he's waiving his rights to alimony and child support. So here's the deal. I have to ask the question if I know you're going through a divorce. And I have to ask, will you be paying any alimony and child support? And I have to count it as a debt, no matter what. I have to count it against you. And here's where it's unfair. In a few minutes, I'm going to explain that for counting child support or alimony as income, you must have at least 3 years remaining. And you're going to think, well, okay, but if I don't have 3 years remaining to pay it, then you shouldn't count it against me since you couldn't count it for me if I was receiving it with less than 3 years. That's not how the rules work. The rules are simple. If you owe it, I have to count it. Now, there is a rule that says if you have less than 10 months remaining on any debt, that we can sometimes ignore it. So yeah, if you have less than 10 months remaining on your alimony or your child support, and I can see you have enough cash to pay for it, I don't have to count that as debt. But other than that, even if it's not legally court ordered yet, I still have to hit you for the alimony and the child support as a debt if you are responsible for paying it. So here's the most important thing about income and debt. Actually, not income. We haven't gotten income. Here's the most important thing about debt. Get everything in writing on the court-approved marital separation agreement. Like I put that in bold, like I was screaming it because it's critical. It is the biggest mistake I see people make, is not being detailed enough in the marital separation agreement. And then when my underwriters and I and our legal team look at it, we say, no, we can see that was implied, but that wasn't specifically outlined. And I cannot give you credit for what you were hoping to accomplish through that provision in the marital separation agreement. All right, let's move on to talking about income concerns when divorcing. So there are obviously a lot of concerns and challenges when I talk to people who are going through a divorce or have been divorced about, hey, how do I qualify? I haven't worked for years. I have, I'm worried about, can I count my alimony and child support? All of those types of questions. Let's dive in and share what you need to know about income when you're going through or recently have been divorced. First of all, alimony and child support. Any fixed income source. I don't care if we're talking about Social Security, if we're talking about disability income, talking about alimony or child support. All fixed income sources have to have an expectation to last at least 3 years. Now, I think that's the mortgage industry being pretty reasonable, since most people are getting a 30-year mortgage, and you're asking me to count child support that you're only getting for the next 5. How are you going to afford to pay your mortgage for the remaining 25 years when that child support goes away? Well, we have to give a little bit of grace and say things are going to change. You're not going to have the expense of that child anymore. You're not going to need as big of a house and you might sell. You're going to have more income by getting a better job. The truth is, we don't know how you're going to be able to afford it, but as long as you have the income for at least 3 years, it's impossible for us to mandate that you have some income that's going to continue for 30. So we drew the line at 3. I think it's one of the areas that the mortgage industry is being pretty fair, almost more than fair. But here's where it becomes a problem. It becomes a problem sometimes when somebody says, hey, I've got alimony coming in on I got divorced, 4 years ago, and I have 5 years worth of alimony coming in at $3,000 a month. Okay, I can't count it because it only comes in for 1 more year. So then I've had other clients who have said, hey, John, I got divorced 2 months ago, and I'm getting $10,000 a month in alimony for the next 2 years. I can't count it. What do you mean? I negotiated for that. Like they were going to try and give me $5,000 a month for 4 years, but I want all my money now, and I figure I'll get remarried or something will be different in 2 years, and I want the money now. Well, you just shot yourself in the foot. $5,000 a month for the next 4 years, I can count. $10,000 a month for the next 2 years, I can't. That's an example of where you need to talk to me while you're negotiating the marital separation agreement, because you need to make sure that what you're negotiating actually is applicable in mortgage guidelines so that I can use that to help you qualify. Here's the second piece of that: child support. Now, most child support agreements say that child support is paid until the child turns 18 or graduates college, or there's a third provision. I can't remember what it is, but those are the two big ones that I argue with people all the time about. So if you have a 16-year-old child you're receiving child support for, and a 14-year-old child you're receiving child support for, and you get $3,000 a month in child support, I'm only going to count $1,500. I'm going to take the three. Now, if it's outlined on the divorce decree that says, hey, it's $2,000 for the 14-year-old and $1,000 for the 16-year-old, then I can use the $2,000. Again, this is critical on how we outline it. But if it just says child support is $3,000 a month, and you have one of the two children that are over the age of 15, 15 is the critical age. If they're over the age of 15 at the time we close escrow, not the time you get divorced, not the time that you started the loan process with me, but on the day we close escrow, if it is beyond their 15th birthday, I can't count the income for that child's child support. And you're going to say, John, this will continue until they're 22 because they're going to college. You can't guarantee me that. It's their choice. They will be an adult. So the rules say if this happens or that happens, and the only thing I can guarantee is that in 2.5 years, they're going to turn 18. And if they go to college, then it will continue. I can't use an if. I can't use an unknown or a potential yes and a potential no. So it is critical if you have children, if your children are going to be over the age of 15 at the time that you think you'll be buying the home, we've got to talk about how do you structure it. Maybe you make it alimony instead of child support. And maybe you set up the alimony. Maybe you're in a harmonious divorce in which your ex is trying to help you. And then you say, hey, let's not call it child support at all. Let's call it alimony. And if you could give me 4 years of alimony, that gives me 1 year to find a home, and I can use the entire amount of the alimony. Because you can set the alimony for whatever dollar amount you want and whatever length you choose. The child support, you can't. So you need to make sure that you're talking to me as you're negotiating these things so that you can fight for the right thing. Because if that child is over 15 years old at the time that you get the keys to the home, then you cannot use the child support that belongs to that child. All right, I think I just covered this. My child will go to college, doesn't matter. All right, negotiating for income is often better than negotiating for getting an asset. I actually said this the opposite way earlier when I was talking about assets, and I said rarely is it better to get an asset than get income. I'm saying the exact same thing again under the income section on purpose because it's that big of a deal. If you have the choice of getting, $50,000 right now as a lump sum or $10,000 a month in alimony for the next 5 years, the $10,000 a month for the next 5 years, first of all, adds up to a little bit more, but you get my point. Let's pretend my math was accurate there. The $10,000 a month, actually, that's way more. Anyway, you get my point. Let's take the $50,000 over 5 years and get $10,000 a year. That is a more accurate statement. $10,000 a year in income. I'd rather you got the $10,000 a year in income because that's $833 a month I get to count as income. You get the $50,000 as a lump sum money. I can't count that as income. Now, there is a way to convert assets to income by putting it into a trust account. So sometimes that actually is the best option for you. We get a lump sum of money. We can put it into a trust account and we set payments out of your trust account, and that counts as income in the eyes of the loan guidelines. So again, what I'm trying to get at is it's critical that I am involved while you're in the middle of the divorce process, explaining to you and your attorney the pros and cons based on, well, what price home are you looking at? Where are interest rates at the time? Where do we think interest rates are going to go between now and when you buy? How much debt do you have? And what's your job situation going to look like? Speaking of job situation, a lot of people are concerned and come to me concerned saying, John, I got a divorce. I'm trying to buy a home and I'm going through a divorce and I'm going to be buying a home. And I'm worried because I've been out of the workforce for the last 6 years, whatever. I was a stay-at-home dad and I was out of the workforce. And so now I'm about to go back into the workforce and I heard you needed 2 years of employment in order to qualify for a mortgage. That's a very real concern. Here's the good news. Depending upon the type of job that you are getting, you don't need 2 years back on the job. Now, if you've been out of work for over 6 months, then you need to be back on the job, have a job for at least 6 months. But if your job is a salaried, stable income earning position, maybe it's hourly and you get to work full time, you always work 40 hours a week and you're paid $30 an hour, I can use that income as soon as you went back to work for 6 months, assuming you had been out of work for greater than 6 months. If you were out of work for less than 6 months, I can use that new job the minute you get the job. Even before you got your paycheck, I can count it. But the key is the income has to be stable. The income has to be stable. What does that mean? Well, it means if you're saying, hey, I'm going to go be a real estate agent, this is a challenging time to be a real estate agent. Even in the best of times, the real estate income is not stable and predictable. If you said, hey, I'm going to go sell cars, not stable and predictable. If you say, hey, I'm going to go get any type of a job, I'm going to go work a whole bunch of overtime. I'm going to get a job making $15 an hour, but I'm going to work 60 hours a week. And so I make a whole bunch of money in overtime. I can't count your overtime because it's not predictable and stable. So I can count your first 40 hours a week as long as you are working a consistent 40 hours a week or paid a salary. If you're working part-time, I need at least a year and sometimes 2 years of your part-time work to know how much income you're going to make on average. Because part-time by definition means that your pay is going to fluctuate. So just be aware of that. The fact is, when you're looking at buying a home or buying out your ex-spouse and you're going back to work, you need to talk to me about what you're looking at doing and what your options look like. Don't assume you don't qualify, but we've got to take the right steps to pay attention to how you should be looking for a job, what type of job you should be looking for. Here's another side note: second jobs. I have a lot of people who say, hey, John, I have a job. Now that I'm going through the divorce and I got to pay for all this stuff and I got, alimony and child support I have to pay, I'm going to go get a second job. The problem is, unless you've had a history of working 2 jobs for the last 2 years, I can't count the income from the second job. Now, if your second job pays more than your first job and it's stable and predictable income, I can count that instead of your first job, but I can't count both. I can't count it in addition to. Only when you've had a history of the most recent 2 years of consistently working 2 jobs at the same time. That is the only time that I can count income from both jobs. So don't think, oh, I'll just go out and get a second job and that'll make up for it. You can't. So there are challenges that we have to deal with. All right. So what are my income options? What are my options if I can't prove enough income? Well, there's a few of them. First of all, we talked about if you have a bunch of assets, we can put those in a trust and pay you out of the trust. So I talked about that earlier. If you're just joining now, make sure you watch the recording of this because there's some really good information about that. Also, buy with somebody else. Your sister, maybe your sister wants to buy a home and you can move in with her for now. The house hacking in buying homes with multiple family members is coming back into style right now. It's a great time to buy a home, but it's also an expensive time to buy a home. And it's a great time because you get to negotiate on the home price, you get seller credits, you get time to find the right home, you get time to do inspections on the homes, lots of great things. And you get to refinance in a few years when interest rates drop again, as I expect them to. Can't guarantee it, but as I expect them to. But you're worried about, how do I afford everything today? I've got, now I'm one income and I've got inflation. I got to pay a whole lot more money for groceries and interest rates are up. And so the house hack of buying with family is a big one right now. So talk to your cousin, talk to your sister, talk to your aunts. Find somebody who's willing to move in with you, but not as a roommate, because we can't count income from a roommate. We can only count income from a co-owner. So if you're buying with someone and they're buying with you, co-owning the house, obligated on the mortgage, I check their income. I need their income to be stable. I need their credit to be good. All of that stuff has to come together, but buying with somebody is a great option. But the question of, can I rent out rooms? You can rent out rooms. I can't use renting out of rooms as income to you. Now you can buy a duplex and I can count the other half of the duplex as income. So that's another option that a lot of people look at. So my final thing I want to talk about, if you have questions, by the way, this is the last piece I want to discuss. So of the 10 people I have on here right now, feel free to post questions. Give me a shout out of what you liked the most about what I discussed today. I haven't gotten any comments from anybody, so hopefully I'm not the only one here. And maybe the system's lying to me and you guys really aren't there. Anyway, give me a comment. Let me know if you have a question or give me a shout out on what you liked about this. But when it comes to what stage of the divorce should I start talking about the lender? I'm pretty sure I answered this about 14 times already, but let me be super, super clear. The moment you think you're going to go through a divorce and you think I'm wanting to be a homeowner at some point in the 3 years after I get divorced, you should talk to me immediately. It is critical that we set up your divorce decree and your marital separation agreement to give you the best advantage. That doesn't mean that you're hurting the other party. For some people, that's what they want. For a lot of people, that's not. You don't want to hurt the other party. You just want to make sure that you're not harmed, that you're in the best position to accomplish the goals that you set for yourself. And you go through so much pain and so much effort to work through the marital separation agreement and the division of assets and custody and all of that stuff. And then in the end, you find out it's still not going to work because you didn't talk to a lender to make sure what you were fighting to get was really going to give you what you wanted. So bottom line is divorce is obviously difficult. It's a challenging time in life. It's a change for you, for your family. And if you want to be a homeowner after the divorce, make sure you listen to this multiple times. Call me if you have questions. Share this with your favorite divorce attorney so they can call me with their clients who need advice on how to become a homeowner after a divorce. The fact of the matter is, without the right advice, you're crossing your fingers and you're hoping. And that's not a strategy. So thank you for joining me. Please, right here, like, comment, share, like, and comment, and then subscribe, and then click the notification bell. I would really suck as a weatherman because the weatherman has to stare over there at the camera while they have a green screen behind them and point out, hey, up here in Minnesota, we got this going on. I would suck as a weatherman because I can't even point correctly at where these little things are on the screen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time today. Please call me if you have any questions, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.